injured and trapped inside the crashed car. The billionaire was in such danger that she was nearly in despair. But when she realized that the people rescuing her were those she had always looked down on, she immediately refused their help and distanced herself from them. What she did not expect was that they not only saved her life from death, but also saved her from being lost in her own prejudice. And for the first time in her life, she was brought into a world where her money, power, and name meant nothing. The road stretched endlessly, a lonely ribbon of asphalt cutting through the dark wilderness. Towering trees loomed on either side, their skeletal branches reaching into the night like gnarled fingers, swaying with the whisper of the wind. The world was utterly silent, save for the steady purr of the engine, a sound that barely registered to the woman behind the wheel. Victoria Harper didn't belong in places like this: forgotten roads, remote landscapes, places where no one of real consequence existed. She thrived in penthouses overlooking glittering skylines, in conference rooms where entire industries bent to her will. Out here there was nothing but isolation, nothing but miles of emptiness, and she had no patience for it. Her manicured fingers tightened around the leather steering wheel as she pressed the gas pedal harder. The Porsche Cayenne surged forward, eating up the road beneath its tires. A cold, indifferent expression rested on her face, the blue glow of the dashboard screen casting sharp shadows across her angular features. She was beautiful in an almost surgical way: flawless skin, perfectly sculpted cheekbones, lips painted in a shade of red too sharp to be warm. But there was no softness to her beauty, no warmth, just control. The notification on her phone flashed again, illuminating the passenger seat beside her. "Your meeting in San Francisco is confirmed. The contract is waiting." She smirked to herself. Another deal secured, another victory. Victoria had spent a lifetime climbing, and now, at 40, she had reached the peak. CEO of Harper Financial Group. Billionaire. A name whispered in boardrooms with a mixture of admiration and fear. People bowed to her, catered to her, feared her. She dictated futures. She crushed those who got in her way. And she had never needed help from anyone. Her eyes flicked to the speedometer. 85 mph, fast but not fast enough. She pressed harder. The road signs blurred past her peripheral vision: sharp turn ahead, reduce speed. She barely glanced at them. Warnings were for people who played by the rules. She made the rules. Then movement. A flash of brown fur. Two glowing eyes wide with panic. A deer. The creature lunged from the tree line, its hooves skidding against the asphalt. It froze in the middle of the road, muscles locked in terror. Victoria's reaction was instant. A sharp yank of the wheel. Too sharp. The Porsche veered violently. The tires screamed in protest as the SUV's momentum shifted, the back end swinging wildly. The guardrail rushed toward her, and for the first time that night, a sliver of fear pierced through her chest. Impact. Ta. The metal barrier crumpled like paper beneath the sheer force of the car. The Porsche shattered through it, flung forward into open air. For a breathless moment she was weightless. Then the world tilted. The first impact came fast. The front end smashed into the rocky slope below, metal shrieking as the frame buckled inward. Glass exploded. The seatbelt locked around her ribs like an iron grip. Victoria's head snapped sideways, skull slamming into the driver's side window, a burst of white-hot pain blinding her. The car flipped. The earth and sky traded places. Again. Branches snapped like brittle bones. Jagged rocks tore into the undercarriage. She was a puppet, yanked in every direction by forces she couldn't control. Then stillness. The wreckage settled, wedged between two thick trees, tilted at a precarious angle. Smoke curled from the hood, mixing with the sharp scent of gasoline. The dashboard flickered weakly, illuminating the ruins of what had once been a luxury car. Inside, Victoria Harper was motionless. Her breathing was shallow, uneven. Blood seeped from a gash at her temple, trailing down her cheek. A shard of glass jutted from her arm. Her hands, the same hands that had once signed billion-dollar contracts with the flick of a pen, now lay limp against the cracked leather seats. The woman who had built an empire, who had never once relied on another soul, was now powerless. The night stretched on, indifferent. And for the first time in her life, Victoria Harper had no control. The night pressed in thick and suffocating, the air dense with the scent of gasoline and damp earth. Smoke curled from the wreckage, rising in slow, ghostly tendrils against the backdrop of the towering trees. Somewhere in the distance, a lone cricket chirped, oblivious to the twisted metal and shattered glass that now littered the ravine. The world remained silent, indifferent. Then footsteps. Light at first, hesitant, the soft crunch of dried leaves beneath small, quick steps. Then heavier, steadier strides following behind. Two shadows emerged from the darkness, their outlines barely visible beneath the fractured moonlight. John moved first, his breath coming fast, chest rising and falling from the effort of running. At 14 he was lean but strong, his body accustomed to the demands of survival. His sister, Aisha, just 10, clutched a small woven basket in her hands, its contents forgotten the moment they had heard the crash. John reached the edge of the wreckage, eyes narrowing as he took in the scene before him. The car, what was left of it, was wedged against two trees, the hood crushed inward, windshield splintered like an intricate spiderweb of fractured glass. Steam hissed from beneath the mangled frame, the sharp, acrid scent of coolant mixing with the burnt metallic tang of oil and rubber. His gaze dropped lower, scanning through the broken window. Then he saw her. A woman, white, well-dressed. John's fingers curled into fists. His first instinct, one sharpened by experience, was hesitation. He knew people like her untouchable, entitled, ruthless. He had seen their kind breeze through the nearest city, stepping out of their polished cars with a look of thinly veiled disdain for everything around them. They never saw people like him, never acknowledged them unless they needed something. And yet, here she was vulnerable, injured, powerless. Aisha stepped beside him, her small voice cutting through the cold silence. "She's hurt," she whispered, her dark eyes wide, scanning the streak of blood on the woman's temple. John exhaled sharply. He knew what the right thing to do was, but did she deserve it? For a moment, he stood still, torn between action and resentment. But then Victoria stirred, a weak, unconscious groan escaping her lips, her body shifting slightly against the seat. She was alive. John cursed under his breath. "Damn it!" "Help me," he muttered to Aisha, already moving. He climbed onto the crumpled hood, boots scraping against the twisted metal. The door wouldn't budge. He tried again, fingers tightening around the handle, yanking with everything he had. It held firm, crushed by the impact. Aisha, trembling but determined, scrambled onto the passenger side, her small hands pressed against the cool, shattered window. "She's trapped," Aisha breathed. John didn't hesitate. He balled his fist and slammed it into the window. Once, twice. On the third hit, the glass gave way, cascading inward in a rain of sharp fragments. Aisha flinched, but John reached inside, wincing as jagged edges nicked his skin. His hands found Victoria's shoulders. Hey, lady, wake up," he said gruffly, shaking her slightly. No response. Damn it, she was heavier than she looked. "Aisha, help me unbuckle her." The girl leaned in, small fingers fumbling for the seatbelt latch, her breath shaky but steady. The belt snapped free, and Victoria's body slumped forward. John caught her just in time, gritting his teeth as he maneuvered her limp form through the broken window. The moment her weight shifted onto him, he staggered under the burden, not because she was impossibly heavy, but because she was dead weight, unconscious, completely dependent on him. The irony wasn't lost on him. They dragged her out, slow and careful, John bearing most of the weight as Aisha steadied her legs. The descent back to solid ground was painstaking, John's arms trembling by the time they reached the forest floor. He knelt for a moment, catching his breath, before shifting Victoria against his back. "I'll carry her," he muttered, voice tight. Aisha hesitated. "John, should we?" "She'll die out here," he cut her off. "Come on." No more debate. With a final grunt of effort, John hoisted the unconscious woman onto his back. She groaned, her head lolling against his shoulder, but remained out cold. The weight pressed into him, muscles burning, but he pushed forward. The walk was long. Too long. The uneven ground made every step a challenge, and every now and then John had to shift his grip, sweat mixing with the dirt on his skin. Why the hell was he even doing this? This woman, someone who had probably spent her whole life looking down on people like him, was now completely in his hands. And she didn't even know it. The thought made something bitter coil in his chest, but he kept walking. The village lights flickered in the distance, warm and faint. He didn't stop until they reached the threshold of his home, a small wooden structure that barely fit the 4 people living inside it. Aisha ran ahead, pushing the door open. "Mama," she called, her voice urgent. Inside, Evelyn, their mother, turned sharply. She was a woman of quiet strength, her salt and pepper hair pulled into a tight scarf, lines of hardship etched into her dark skin. The moment she saw the unconscious stranger slumped against her son's back, her expression hardened. "What is this?" she asked, voice unreadable. John, breathless, set Victoria down onto the single mattress in the corner. His arms felt like lead, but he didn't look away from his mother's sharp gaze. "She crashed," he said simply. "She would have died." Evelyn was silent for a long moment. Then, with a heavy sigh, she knelt beside the bed, examining Victoria's injuries. Her fingers were careful, practiced, as she pressed against the woman's ribs, checking for fractures. She moved with efficiency, no hesitation, no wasted motions. But John saw at the flicker of something in her expression: conflict. She had spent her whole life knowing what people like this woman thought of her. She had been dismissed by them, ignored, belittled. And yet, here she was, treating her wounds. She exhaled slowly. Then, with quiet resolve, she turned to Aisha. "Boil some water. Get my herbs." "See." Aisha nodded and disappeared into the back room. John watched his mother, his jaw tightening. "You don't have to." Evelyn cut him a look. "We do not turn away the injured." John swallowed hard. His mother was a better person than him. Still, as he looked down at the unconscious woman lying in their home, he couldn't shake the uneasy feeling in his gut. She would not be grateful. He knew that. But it didn't matter. Because people like them didn't do good things for a thank you. They did them because it was right. And so, as Victoria Harper lay there, breathing shallow, unaware of the hands that had just saved her life, Evelyn silently continued dressing her wounds. Pain was the first thing Victoria felt, a slow, pulsing throb in her skull, a dull ache spreading through her ribs. Her body was heavy, leaden, each breath a struggle against the tightness in her chest. The air smelled strange, earthy, laced with something herbal, something unfamiliar. Her eyelids fluttered open, and the world came into focus. The ceiling above her was rough wood, darkened with age, the slats uneven, a ceiling fan lazily turning above her. The walls were bare save for a few shelves lined with glass jars and cloth-wrapped bundles. The bed, if it could even be called that, was a thin mattress atop a wooden frame, the sheets coarse against her skin. The room was small, dimly lit by a single kerosene lamp. This was not a hospital. This was not her world. Panic lanced through her, sending a sharp jolt of adrenaline through her veins. She tried to sit up, but the movement ignited a searing pain across her ribs. A strangled gasp escaped her lips. There was movement in the doorway. A woman, black, middle-aged, her salt and pepper hair wrapped in a headscarf, stepped forward. Her gaze was calm, unreadable, but there was a quiet authority in the way she carried herself. "You're awake," the woman observed. Victoria swallowed, her throat dry, her voice barely more than a rasp. Where the word caught, rough and hoarse. She tried again. "Where am I?" The woman set a clay cup on the small wooden table beside the bed. "You're in my home. My son and daughter found you after your accident." Accident. The word sent a flood of fractured memories crashing back her car, the deer, the guardrail, the fall. Her stomach twisted. She turned her head, eyes narrowing as she took in the details of the room, the sparse furnishings, the handmade blankets. This was a poor person's home. A poor black person's home. Disgust curled in her chest. She wanted out. "I need a phone," she said, her voice sharper now, pushing past the pain. "I need to call my people." The woman, whoever she was, didn't react. "There's no service here." Victoria's lips parted, the response so absurd she almost laughed. "No service? What kind of backward, forgotten place was this?" "Then get me to a landline," she snapped. The woman met her gaze, steady, unimpressed. There isn't one." The words struck like a slap. Victoria's pulse kicked up. No phone. No way to contact anyone. No way out. She was trapped. Her breath came faster, the room suddenly feeling too small, the air too thick. She tried to push herself upright again, gritting her teeth against the pain. The movement pulled at the bandages wrapped around her arms, her ribs. Then she realized someone had touched her. A sharp, visceral revulsion surged through her. Her hands shot to the bandages, fingers curling around the fabric. She tore them off, one by one, wincing as fresh blood welled beneath the torn wounds. "What the hell are you doing?" the woman demanded, stepping forward, reaching as if to stop her. Victoria recoiled, her breath coming in short, furious bursts. "Don't touch me." The woman stilled, her expression tightening just slightly, but not in surprise as if she had expected this. Victoria's voice shook with rage, with something dangerously close to hysteria. "I don't need your help. I don't need—" She choked on the words, the weight of her own helplessness pressing down on her. She was in pain, weak, lost, with no resources, no allies. She had nothing. And she was completely at their mercy. The realization made her stomach turn. The woman exhaled, a slow, measured breath, then turned away without another word. She walked toward the door, pausing only to glance over her shoulder. "You can rip off every bandage if you want. Won't change the fact that you're stuck here until someone comes looking for you." Then she left, closing the curtain behind her. Victoria clenched her jaw, her body trembling, not from pain but from fury. She wouldn't stay here. She couldn't. But for the first time in her life, she had no choice. The morning arrived with a dull, muted light seeping through the small cracks in the wooden walls. Victoria had barely slept. Every muscle ached, her ribs ached worse, but it wasn't the pain that kept her awake. It was the suffocating awareness, the gnawing, inescapable reality that she was still here, still trapped, still surrounded by them. She shifted, testing her strength. The dizziness from the day before had lessened, her limbs steadier. She could move. She could walk. And that meant she could leave. Slowly, carefully, she swung her legs off the bed and pushed herself upright, swallowing down the sting in her ribs. She needed to get back to her car, to her things, to anything that still tied her to the world she belonged to. The house was quiet. The faint murmur of voices drifted in from outside. She took a slow breath, ignoring the discomfort, and moved toward the door. The moment she stepped out, the warmth of the sun hit her skin, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and something faintly smoky. The village stretched before her, small wooden houses clustered together, worn but sturdy, connected by uneven dirt paths. And they were watching her. Not directly, not openly, but she felt it, the quick glances, the cautious eyes tracking her as she stood there in her rumpled, blood-stained clothes, glaring at the unfamiliar world around her. Then, a voice. "You're up." She turned. John stood a few feet away, arms crossed, eyes unreadable. Victoria straightened, pulling herself up to her full height. "I need you to take me back to my car." His expression didn't change. "Why?" She nearly scoffed. "Because it's mine." Something flickered in his gaze, something sharp, something tired. He didn't move, didn't rush to obey like people usually did when she made demands. Instead, he just studied her, as if weighing whether she was even worth the effort. Finally, he sighed. "Fine. Let's go." She didn't thank him. The walk was longer than she remembered, the path uneven, the ground unsteady beneath her still recovering body. Every step sent a dull ache through her ribs, but she refused to slow down, refused to look weak. John said nothing, just walked ahead, his pace even, his silence heavier than words. By the time they reached the wreckage, her breath was coming in shallow, uneven gasps. Her car was still there, a ruined shell of metal and glass. The sight of it, what was left of it, made something hot and furious rise in her throat. She staggered forward, her hands shaking as she yanked at the driver's side door. It barely budged. John watched, arms still crossed. "It's not going to work." She ignored him, pulling harder, until the door finally gave way with a groan of twisted metal. The interior was wrecked. Papers scattered, glass shattered, the smell of burnt rubber and gasoline lingering in the air. But her bag was there, her phone. She snatched it up, desperate, pressing the power button. Nothing. She cursed under her breath, trying again. And again. Still nothing. Her fingers curled around the useless device, rage burning through her veins. She turned, her voice sharp. "Give me yours." John just stared at her. Then, with an infuriating slowness, he said, "I don't have one." She let out a bitter laugh, half disbelief, half exhaustion. "Of course you don't." He didn't react. Her hands clenched, nails digging into her palms. There has to be some way to call for help. A landline, a radio, something. His expression hardened, his voice calm but firm. "I told you. There's nothing. You're stuck here until your people come looking for you." The words landed like a blow. No escape, no contact, no control. She had never felt this kind of helplessness. Her legs trembled, the weight of it all pressing down on her, suffocating. For a moment, just a moment, she wanted to scream. Instead, she swallowed hard and turned away. "Let's go." She didn't look at him as she said it. Didn't acknowledge the way his eyes lingered on her, as if waiting for something. They walked back in silence. That night, as she sat at the wooden table with their food in front of her, she barely tasted it. For the first time in her life, she was no longer the one giving orders. The morning arrived thick with humidity, the air dense and unmoving, clinging to Victoria's skin the moment she stepped outside. She had barely slept, her mind running in endless circles, grasping for a solution that didn't exist. Every second in this place felt like a slow erosion of everything she had built: her power, her influence, her control. She needed out. But the reality of her situation sat heavy in her chest. There was no way out. Not yet. The village was already awake, the quiet hum of morning activity filling the air. Women carried baskets on their heads, their feet kicking up dust as they moved. Children ran barefoot along the dirt paths, their laughter sharp against the silence in her chest. No one paid her any mind. No one rushed to accommodate her, to acknowledge her presence like they should have. She was used to being seen, being heard, being obeyed. Here, she was nothing. John stood near the well, hoisting a heavy bucket of water, his muscles tensing with the effort. His younger sister, Aisha, knelt beside him, scrubbing clothes in a metal basin. Evelyn, their mother, stood nearby, rolling a bundle of herbs between her hands. They moved like a machine, synchronized, efficient, unbothered by her presence. Victoria's stomach twisted. She needed them. But she refused to need them. She lifted her chin. "I want to leave." Evelyn barely glanced at her. "You can't." Victoria's hands curled into fists at her sides. "Then what am I supposed to do? Just sit here and wait." Evelyn turned then, her dark eyes sharp, assessing. "If you want to survive here, you work. No one sits idle in this house." Victoria stiffened. The words were so foreign, so absurd, she almost laughed. She didn't work. Not like this. She gave orders. She paid people to do things like this. Evelyn didn't wait for a response. There's food to be made, water to be carried, firewood to be gathered. You can choose, or you can starve. John let out a quiet snort but said nothing, rolling his sleeves up before going back to work. Aisha peeked up at her, curious but silent. Victoria stood frozen. The sheer audacity of it. They were treating her like she was one of them, like she was beneath them. Her pride flared hot in her chest. She would not be reduced to this. So she did nothing. She sat in the shade, arms crossed, jaw tight, watching as the day passed around her. They didn't try to convince her. They didn't offer a second time. By midday, the sun was merciless, the heat pressing against her skin, thick and punishing. Hunger gnawed at her ribs, sharp and insistent. Her throat was dry, lips chapped, body heavy with exhaustion. She glanced toward the house. The smell of food drifted from inside, something warm, something rich with spices she couldn't place. Her stomach clenched. She told herself she would not beg. Evening came. The table was set. A simple meal: roasted cassava, stewed vegetables, fresh bread still warm from the fire. Aisha sat cross-legged on the floor, tearing into a piece with her small hands, her face relaxed, content. Evelyn moved methodically, passing plates to John and the others. No one handed her anything. Victoria swallowed hard. She turned to Evelyn, forcing the words out sharp and clipped. "I want to eat." Evelyn didn't look up. "Then work." The finality in her voice left no room for argument. For the first time in her life, Victoria had no power. And so, the next morning, she worked. She hated every second of it, the way the bucket handle dug into her palms as she hauled water from the well, the way sweat dampened her collar, the way John barely looked at her as she struggled to keep up. By noon, her arms ached, her breath ragged. She had never lifted anything heavier than a designer handbag in her life, but hunger was a cruel motivator. When evening came, she was given a plate. She ate in silence. For the first time in 40 years, Victoria Harper had learned what it was to be small. The days bled together, slow and unrelenting. Victoria woke to the sound of footsteps on dirt, the distant murmur of voices, the faint crackle of firewood. She woke aching, sore in places she hadn't known could ache. Her hands raw from carrying buckets, her legs weak from walking miles she never would have walked before. But she no longer refused. She no longer sat idle, arms crossed, waiting for someone to cave. No one would. She did not work because she wanted to. She worked because she had no other choice. At first, she did only what was necessary: carrying water, gathering wood, things that required no skill, no thought. But survival had a way of dulling pride, of breaking down resistance until necessity became habit. By the third day, she no longer hesitated when Evelyn handed her a knife to chop vegetables. She no longer balked when Aisha reached for her hand to show her how to braid dried grass into rope. She followed John to the small garden behind the house, where thin stalks of maize and cassava grew in uneven rows, and she knelt in the dirt beside him. She told herself it was only for now, that she was still above this, that this wasn't who she was. But as the sun set, casting long shadows across the village, she sat on the wooden steps of Evelyn's home, hands streaked with soil, sweat drying against her skin, and for the first time she didn't feel entirely like a stranger. That night, John and Aisha took her to the river. The walk was long, the path winding, cutting through dense trees that whispered under the weight of the wind. The night sky stretched above them, vast and untouched by city lights, the stars burning brighter than she had ever seen. The air smelled of damp earth, of wood smoke drifting from unseen fires. Aisha walked ahead, humming softly, her small hands trailing through the tall grass. John stayed beside Victoria, his steps measured, quiet. It had been 3 days since she had stopped fighting, but not once had he spoken to her more than necessary. Not once had he acknowledged the shift, the way she no longer carried herself like someone expecting deference. She wasn't sure why she noticed. The river appeared suddenly, its surface silver under the moonlight. Aisha skipped ahead, slipping off her sandals, stepping into the shallows with a delighted sigh. John crouched at the edge, washing his hands, letting the water trickle through his fingers. Victoria stood frozen. For so long, she had only wanted to leave. Only thought of how much she despised this place, these people, this existence that wasn't hers. But now, as she looked at the girl laughing in the water, the boy whose shoulders carried too much weight, the village behind her where people lived and struggled and endured without the luxury of anger, she didn't know what she felt. For the first time, she didn't know who she was anymore. The morning of the 7th day arrived with the distant hum of rotor blades cutting through the sky. Victoria stood near the edge of the village, her arms crossed, her breath steady despite the tightness in her chest. The rescue team had come. They had been searching for her for days, their polished uniforms and sharp efficiency a stark contrast to the slow, deliberate rhythm of life she had come to know here. Aisha was the first to reach her, small feet kicking up dust as she ran, her braids bouncing with every hurried step. In her hands, she held something, a simple bracelet, woven from dried grass, delicate but sturdy. She stopped just short of Victoria, hesitating for a moment before extending it. "For you," she said softly. Victoria stared at it. It was nothing, a worthless thing, and yet her fingers closed around it, gripping it tighter than she meant to. Aisha's eyes shone with something unreadable. "So you don't forget." A lump formed in Victoria's throat, but she forced herself to swallow it down. She wasn't sentimental. She never had been. But something about the way this girl looked at her, about the way she had changed in ways she hadn't asked for, made her chest ache. She turned to John, standing a few feet away, his posture stiff, arms crossed. He hadn't come closer, hadn't spoken, but his eyes, they said everything. There was no resentment, no lingering hostility, just an understanding, a quiet recognition of what had passed between them. Victoria exhaled. Then, for the first time, she lifted a hand and waved. Aisha waved back immediately, jumping slightly as if trying to make sure Victoria saw her. John hesitated, then nodded. She turned before she could change her mind, stepping toward the helicopter. The wind from the blades whipped against her skin, dust rising in the air as she climbed inside. The moment she strapped in, the weight of her old life settled around her like a suffocating second skin. The helicopter lifted. The village shrank beneath her. She looked down and realized she had left something behind. The city welcomed her with cold efficiency. The moment her feet touched the polished marble floors of her high-rise, the world rushed in. Assistants, lawyers, executives' faces she had once commanded with a glance swarmed her with questions, schedules, demands. Her office was just as she had left it, an empire carved out of steel and glass, untouchable, powerful, hers. But nothing felt the same. The first week back, she moved through her days as if nothing had changed. She attended meetings, made decisions, signed contracts. But at night, when she was alone in her penthouse, surrounded by silence too deep and too empty, her fingers would graze the woven bracelet still looped around her wrist. 1 month later, she made a decision. When she arrived at the village again, it was with an entourage, workers carrying medical supplies, crates of food, blueprints for a new school, a plan for a permanent clinic. But Victoria didn't move with the same arrogance she once had. She didn't expect gratitude, didn't demand recognition. She listened. She found Evelyn first, standing outside her home, arms folded, expression unreadable as she watched the vehicles unload. Victoria held out an envelope, money, enough to change everything. Evelyn didn't take it. "We don't need charity," she said simply. Victoria had expected that, but this time she didn't scoff, didn't pull back in frustration. Instead, she asked, "Then what do you need?" Evelyn studied her. Then she gestured toward the village, something that lasts, and Victoria understood. She didn't just give money. She built a school, a medical center, a foundation designed not as a handout, but as an investment in something that had already been strong long before she arrived. The day it was completed, she found John standing outside the new clinic, hands in his pockets, watching as children ran through the freshly painted doors of the school. Victoria stepped beside him, looking ahead. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Then, without a word, John turned and extended his hand. Victoria looked at it. Then, slowly, she shook it. Not as a transaction, not as a show of power, but as a recognition of something real. As she left the village for the second time, she no longer felt like she was leaving something behind, because this time she had given something back. And for the first time in her life, she had learned that power was not in what you controlled, but in what you chose to change. Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.